This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. Next 60 minutes, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from across the African continent. Plenty to cover tonight. Let's start with the run through the markets. The top 40 of the JSE was having a rather interesting day, essentially closing a little lower in the red, but nonetheless it's still 6.5% higher so far in the year. Through to the 5th of March, though, foreign investors have been cashing out of stocks in South Africa at a fairly rapid clip, in fact for 11 days straight. MTN, also in focus tonight, it announced plans to prune its books by selling assets estimated at over $1 billion over the next 3 years, and investors loved that story. It shares are 15% higher at 13.23 GMT, nearly reversing all losses made so far in the year. Here's what's coming up tonight. Zimbabwe is set to scrap controversial indigenization laws to allow foreign investment into the sector. The IMF releases billions of dollars to Egypt. And the Chinese telecommunications giant Huawei suing the US over its equipment ban. Let's start tonight though in Zimbabwe, where the country's finance minister says a rule that requires any investor, or rather local investors, to hold 51% of shares in local platinum mines will be scrapped, and foreigners will be allowed to 100% own all the operations in a bid to revive investment in the country's mining sector. Now, the rules could also be extended to diamond mining too. That's according to the country's mining minister. The change would effectively reverse policies introduced by the former president, Robert Gabriel Mugabe, and may increase Zimbabwe's appeal to the world's top platinum producers, including Anglo-American Platinum. Abandoning the requirement to transfer a controlling stake to local entities is part of a wider set of efforts to get the Southern African nation's economy out of a long-running and debilitating economic crisis. Right then, quite a bit to get through on this front. So let's get the latest now from CGTN's Farai Mokutuya. He joins us now live from Harare with more. Farai, before we get into the mining business, what's the latest on the fuel supply problems in the country? Is it as acute as it was before, or has it been partially alleviated?
Well, Ramah, there's certainly been an improvement in the situation over the last few days. The queues are a lot shorter, a lot more fuel stations have petrol and diesel, and so there is a marked improvement. And I think that's largely due to the fact that, credit lines have been availed to some of the fuel companies. Some forex has been availed for them to be able to increase and boost the amount of fuel that they were able to bring in. The problem here is, of course, the fact that US dollars are in short supply, and so these companies are unable to bring in as much fuel as they'd like to, but I can tell you that the Reserve Bank has said it's availed credit lines, and we are seeing that difference now. The queues are a lot shorter, and there's a lot more fuel on the market.
Indeed. Let's get to the finance minister. Professor Nkube said that, or rather he told Bloomberg yesterday, that this indigenization law would be scrapped, at least as far as it contains, as far as it refers to platinum mines. But do we have any more firm timelines on when this would happen, assuming there's no severe opposition to this proposal in Parliament?
Well, Ramah, as you quite rightly put it there, Parliament, there is a process, there are processes and procedures in terms of adjusting or, changing laws, and so there will be a process that is required to be followed, but it's unlikely that there will be any major resistance to this, given the fact that it is changing a law that was largely unpopular even with the local Zimbabweans. Is a law that was believed to have been scaring away potential investment, and given the potential that making these changes will have on generating new capital and also winning back some of those investors that had been scared away. We'll expect that this process will be expedited. The fact that the finance minister is mentioning it publicly, one will assume that he's already received the backing of government and cabinet to go ahead with this, and so the next step will obviously to undertake take the legal procedures in terms of changing that law. And as I said, because of its potential to bring in more investment from existing players and new players, but also, what Zimbabwe is trying to achieve by, growing its mining sector is to increase the volumes, increase productivity, so it can generate more exports and generate more US dollars. And so I think that is the end game. That's what, Zimbabwe is trying to achieve, what government is trying to achieve. And so because of that, we expect that it will go through and without much resistance, I would imagine.
Right. The finance minister also pointing out that the end of the dollar peg for RTGS dollars, or bond notes as the predecessors were called, he's pointed to that as evidence that there are reforms being carried out. But there's still a fairly large gap between the official rate, which is about 2.5 to the dollar, and the parallel market rate, which is over 3.3. What explains that gap between those two?
Well, Ramah, I think a couple of things. First of all, I think, essentially it's a supply and demand issue. As long as there aren't enough US dollars to meet demand, then obviously those distortions will remain. The parallel market will continue to exist, and that is exactly what we're seeing now. The fact that, there isn't enough US dollars, enough hard currency in circulation for those who require it and want it, and so that parallel market remains where it is. But there also have been concerns raised that, this rate on the intermarket trading platform has remained stuck at 2.5 since this platform started operating some 2 weeks ago. And so, people are a bit concerned that could it be that monetary authorities are deliberately trying to suppress it or keep it there so that it doesn't run away. That is one of the concerns, certainly the questions that had been put at the central bank when they announced the launch of this intermarket rate and that they'd remove this peg, was how will they contain the rate, make sure that it doesn't run away. And they said they would leave it to the market to determine. And so there are fears and concerns that perhaps they are trying behind the scenes to make sure that it remains at that 2.5 so that it doesn't run away and get much higher. But also, we also hear that some people who are holding US dollars are reluctant to offload them at that suppressed rate of 2.5. They want it to be a bit higher, and then they'll be able to avail the US dollars that they hold. But I think also, it also goes back to the fact that, for a long time, Zimbabweans have been short of confidence and trust in the financial system, in the financial sector, and in the monetary policy, monetary authorities. And so to win back and cultivate that trust and confidence will take time. And I think as long as government is able to stick to its guns, to maintain what it said it will do, to be disciplined fiscally, to avoid borrowing, to rein in its expenditure, and not to, to try to manage this rate, to let the market forces determine how things go, then I think that trust and confidence will be won back. But it's certainly not an overnight issue.
Indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. Thank you very much for the update. That's Ramah Nyang there live from Zimbabwe's capital, Harare. Now, on to Sudan. The country's president, Omar Hassan al-Bashir, has appointed a new central bank governor. The move is part of efforts to push on with top-level changes in his administration. And these are designed to end persistent nationwide protests triggered by an economic crisis. Hussein Yahya Jangol has been appointed to head the central bank. He replaces Mohamed Khair al-Zubair, who had been with the central bank since 1982. The change comes as the central bank is grappling with an acute shortage of foreign currency. The lack of it has been a key trigger in triggering nationwide protests against Bashir's 3-decade-long rule. He has since then launched sweeping changes in the face of these protests. That includes imposing a year-long state of emergency across the country and dissolving federal and provincial governments. On to South Africa now. The country's energy regulator, NERSA, has granted the struggling state power firm Eskom average power price increases that were far below what the utility had actually asked for. The regulator says that its aim was to balance both the interests of the company to be fiscally healthy, but also public interests too. Now, NERSA says that Eskom could raise tariffs by 9.4% in the 2019-2020 fiscal year, 8.1% in the 2020-21 fiscal year, and 5.22% in the year after that. Eskom, however, had wanted price hikes of anywhere between 15.4% and 17.1% over 3 years in the latest, to use a technical term, multi-year price determination application. NERSA also allowed Eskom to recover $270 million from its customers for electricity supplied in the 2017-2018 fiscal year. That sum is well below the $1.5 billion in cost recoveries that Eskom had applied for. The MTN Group published its financial results for the year ending December 2018. 2017, and that sent its share price soaring by over 16% on the 7th of March. Its subscriber base was up by over 7% to 233 million customers across 21 markets in Africa and the Middle East. The number of active data users was also up by 14.5% to 79 million, and the active mobile money subscriber base hit 27 million too. CGTN's Angela Coppola has been taking a much deeper look at the numbers.
The company's share price leapt 14% on the release of the results and the announcement that it was paying a full dividend.
Good commercial momentum, numbers are coming through, a lot of opportunity in our markets. We're a scale player, we've got resource, we've got infrastructure, we've got a lot of ability to take advantage of the opportunity. I guess the one thing I'm always worrying about is, are we doing enough?
While the results are encouraging, long-suffering shareholders long for the days of an $18 share price. It's currently trading at a little over $6 a share.
It's probably going to take a couple of years for it to sort of get back up to the sort of levels that it was at trading at previously, prior to the situation in Nigeria. And of course the worry is that the Nigerian or some other government might spring another surprise on MTN, which of course would knock it down again. But if everything stays favourable on the regulatory front, let's put it that way, then I think these numbers suggest that MTN is back on a solid footing and that shareholder returns should improve from here on out.
The group also announced that it sold off its interest in Mascom, the Botswana business it was involved in. It was part of a portfolio review which included Eswatini, Botswana and Irancell.
Mascom really is the one that we don't have a controlled position. It's not MTN branded. We're not really able to implement our MTN Bright strategy as we are across the rest of the portfolio. And because our partners there, Econet, put, I think, a very decent offer on the table, we decided on balance it was good to exit there.
The portfolio review doesn't stop there, however.
We've got around 40 billion rands worth of value tied up in the e-commerce investments and in the tower company investments. And we've basically taken a decision that's what's important is commercial integration and not ownership. And so we've identified these as not long-term strategic assets for the group. And, over the next while, we're going to need to work out, how best to start monetizing those.
The market and investors like the results, but there are some challenges.
At least in Nigeria, they've got the sanctions issue in Iran. Other markets are also facing some challenges. But I think the so-called Bright strategy, growth strategy, is starting to pay dividends, and that's reflected in the operational performance that we've seen reported in these results today.
While the company is surprising on the upside with those financial results, there are some pressure points in the medium to longer term. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
All right, then, company news. Let's start in the banking sector with Standard Bank. It's South Africa's largest lender by assets. It says its full-year earnings rose at less than half the growth rate in 2017. That's because of the impact of adverse markets, offsetting strong performances in its retail banking division. Headline earnings per share for the year ending in December was up 7% to $1.23. The Central Bank of Kenya and the Communications Authority in the same country will be required to formulate and publish regulations on mobile money transaction fees for all mobile money operators. Now, they're required to make this move within 6 months once the House, that's Kenya's National Assembly, adopts a report by the Committee on Communication, Information and Innovation. If the committee's report is adopted by the House, mobile lending apps will also be regulated by the Central Bank of Kenya and the Communications Authority. We're still in East Africa. Deacon's East Africa's top shareholders want administrators to start the search for $4.5 million as convertible debt to save the troubled fashion retailer. In a resolution passed at an EGM in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, the shareholders authorized the joint administrators, Peter Kahi and Atul Shah, to get the loan, which is supposed to support working capital and pay down debts. And Facebook's CEO and founder, Mark Zuckerberg, said that the company will encrypt conversations on more of its messaging services and make them compatible. That's a latest sign that the world's biggest social network sees its future more in intimate online chats. Zuckerberg said that in a post on his Facebook profile that within a few years, direct messaging would dwarf discussion on the traditional open platform or Facebook's newsfeed, where public posts often can and do go viral across the world. That's a run through your company headlines. It's time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. Egypt gets wants more out of the $12 billion loan from the IMF. And the ratings agencies come under fire for their analysis of African economies. Is it fair? Unfair? We'll find out next.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sudan. Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business. Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. Let's go to Egypt now, where the government has received the fifth installment of the International Monetary Fund loan program. At that time, that was $12 billion. Now, according to an official MENA report, the funding will be used to support the state budget. In January, Egypt's net foreign reserves increased by about $66 million to about $42.6 billion. The IMF in Egypt agreed on a 3-year, $12 billion loan program back in 2016 that's aimed essentially at reviving the country's struggling economy, bring down public debt and control inflation too. The IMF's executive board approved the granting to Egypt of the fifth tranche of this loan package, about $2 billion, after completion of the program's fourth review. The fifth and final review will be done in June 2019. According to reports, the country's debt increased by 15% in September to over $93 billion. In the meantime, there's a lot more debt coming into Egypt. The African Development Bank has granted the country a $1.2 billion loan. So then let's get the latest on this from CGTN's Yasser Hakim. He joins us now live from Cairo. Yasser, let's follow up on that $1.2 billion loan from the African Development Bank. Is it going straight into deficit financing, or is it ring-fenced for a specific infrastructure project?
Yes, Ramah, it's going to be spent on different programs, actually. $500 million, for example, will go into transforming efforts to transform electricity, especially in poor areas. There's an amount that's undisclosed that will go into technical training for students. Another amount will also go into rural sanitation in Upper Egypt, poor areas in Upper Egypt, as well as trying to help in the restructural reforms to try to include the informal sector, we call the shadow sector, into the formal economy, and the AFDP had cited before that it had success with Nigeria in 2014, whereby when it managed to include the informal sector or part of it into the formal sector, that doubled the GDP of Nigeria back then, and they want to do the same or help Egypt do the same in 2019-2020.
Right, so Egypt, though, has over $90 billion in public debt. That's an enormous number, and the debt service is increasingly taking up a larger and larger portion of government expenditure. What's the plan to reduce debt service costs, the size of the outstanding debt, but at the same time increase tax revenues?
Yes, the debt, if you talk about debt, public debt is 102% of GDP. The foreign debt alone is 92% of GDP, which is high. And first of all, the government is trying to change the way it borrows or try the way it issues bonds. For example, now the maturity for these bonds, like the latest ones last month, will be 10, 15 and 30-year maturities before to 3 to 6 months. And this will relieve the burden of repayment plan, make it easier on the long term than now. Then you have to talk about trying to increase the income through more manufacturing, trying to encourage investors to go into manufacturing, production and industry, not just services, so that Egypt can export more. And this is lagging behind for Egypt, that the latest results show that exports are really low. This year is down than even last year. Then you've got to cut expenses. It's already been doing so and it's continuing on this. Cut expenses such as subsidies on energy, on food, and also to reduce imports, something the government has started before and is continuing now. And then more tax revenues. And it's not about including new taxes or presenting new taxes, but actually restructuring the way the government would collect taxes and try to reduce the tax evasions in the country through new laws and regulations and incentives as well to encourage investors and the informal market to go into the formal market and to pay taxes with a lot of incentives to do so.
Right.
Back to you, Ramah.
One last question for you, Yasser. Egypt has issued $4 billion in Eurobonds, barely a fortnight ago, in fact, with coupon rates that look very interesting, 6.2% to 8.7% on the higher end for the 30-year note. But that issue was 5 times oversubscribed. Are there other Eurobonds coming to the market in this fiscal year?
Well, until now, the government is still studying nothing that has been confirmed. But I believe, at least before the end of 2019, we expect more issuances to take place. But what we know is that there has been a promotional tour to Asia and Far East, especially 3 countries in particular, to try to issue bonds for the first time from China, Japan, and South Korea. So the target is that before the end of the fiscal year 2018-2019, which ends in July in Egypt, the government is planning to issue bonds with what you call the panda bonds and the samurai bonds, which are bonds with the Japanese yen and with the Chinese yuan. And that will be something new for Egypt. We don't know how much yet, it's nothing announced, but the government hopes it can able to do so and get agreements to go ahead before next July.
Indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. Thank you for the update. Yasser Kim there, live from Cairo. Now, many an African state has expressed its dissatisfaction with ratings agencies, with some blaming them for giving what have been described as undisciplined or irrational ratings. Governance bodies like the African Peer Review Mechanism are in fact now calling for the establishment of what they want to be a credit rating advisory and research bureau. How's this going to work? Well, the details. Here's CGTN's Girum Chala from Yaoundé.
In simple terms, credit rating is an assessment of the credit worthiness of a borrower in general terms or with respect to a particular date or financial obligations. To get sovereign credit rating for borrowing purposes, for instance, African states currently go only to the 3 globally dominant credit rating agencies, Standard & Poor's, Moody's and Fitch. But there is a problem.
Countries are just rated and they don't have any power to contest or appeal the ratings. Though there is such provision, but the window is very, very weak. What we see is rating agencies just make assumptions which are very, very grave, and those assumptions are prejudicing African countries.
Apart from credit rating, Africa also has problems related with general economic governance, and the continent, through the heads of State Assembly, has assigned the Africa Peer Review Mechanism to take the mandate of coming up with recommended ways of better economic governance in Africa.
We have been asked to monitor the implementation of Agenda 2063 and the SDGs 2030. if you would appreciate that within these frameworks there are specific aspects to do with economic governance and political governance. But we also have a mandate to support member states in their dealings with international credit rating agencies as a concern in order to explore how African governments can improve their access to global capital, affordable global capital.
Back to the specific issue of credit ratings. And here in Yaoundé, on the sidelines of the African Union Finance and Monitoring and Economic Planning meeting, experts and analysts of the sector are now advising Africa to establish a bureau which would serve as a credit rating advice and research center.
He proposed to establish a research and advisory bureau. It's not a new institution which is going to be established to perform the work that is done by international credit rating agencies. What it sought to do is just to give countries support in the area of credit rating in Africa, which is in a way to get more involved in the credit rating process, which is quite a slacky area.
The general assessment on African states based on their credit ratings is good, but still experts suggest the continent needs to continue harnessing its potentials, including its natural resource and demographic dividend, for an excellent economic growth and less pinching debt repayment strategies. Group Data CGTN, Yaoundé, Cameroon.
All right, then let's jump into the tech world. Estonia's ride-hailing unicorn, Taxify, has announced plans to widen its business focus by changing its name to Bolt. Now, the brand's change aims to also bring the brand identity pretty much in line with the company's vision of evolving in a transportation sector that now covers a range of other things, transport on demand, on motorbikes, on scooters, commercial cargo vehicles as well. The company started talks for another round of funding. In 2018, it closed a $175 million round at a $1 billion valuation, led by Daimler. That's the German car maker. You know them as the guys who make Mercedes. The new brand will be gradually rolled out across Bolt's global markets over the following weeks. Right then, so let's see what these actually means for you if you tend to use Bolt services in East Africa. Shivachi Meleji is the General Manager for Bolt, formerly Taxify, in the region. Welcome to the studio.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
Okay, so Bolt to me infers a couple of things. It infers among them a shift and a focus towards electrification. But electrification doesn't really work, at least not in the context of East Africa. There are barely any EVs around here. So is that part of the change for this region as well?
I think there's a very exciting narrative really behind the change of the name Bolt. So if you think about Taxify, we started off 5 years ago with as a taxi hailing firm, right? And hence the name Taxify. But over these 5 years, we've launched a couple of products. We've launched motorcycles in East Africa. We've launched scooters in Europe. We've launched tuk-tuks in Tanzania and Kenya. And therefore, for us, it seems like a very natural part of our transition, right? Like we are not just a taxi firm. We've evolved to offer these huge range of products, and therefore, it necessitates a change of name. And then the second principle behind our rebranding as well is, like you say, that we also, Bolt connotes a sense of fast, like a very fast thing that because our sense, like one of the things we believe in is to get people from one point to the other in urban centers at a very good speed so that they don't waste too much time in traffic. And the third principle is that we believe the future is electric, and therefore we want to embrace the future, and hence the name Bolt. But I think what is relevant for Africa really is the first two principles. One is that our scope of products has expanded quite widely, and therefore we need a name that reflects our new identity. And then secondly, also that our focus remains moving people in urban centers at a speed that it's quite reasonable.
Is the business going to expand beyond the focus, as you pointed out, on moving people quickly, but also to include the ability to move goods from point A to point B quickly? Because if you're expanding into tuk-tuks or motorcycles, light commercial vehicles, for argument's sake, I mean, there's a fairly large opportunity here to build out that last mile distribution network as part of the service offering for Bolt, isn't there?
If you think about transportation, really, that there's such massive opportunity, and Taxify, even ourselves, we realize that we've barely scratched the surface. So let's talk about East Africa, for example. What we're doing is just solving the problem of mobility for people alone.
Within urban centers.
Exactly, within urban centers. But that doesn't mean that we've solved the transportation problem. There's still a wide opportunity for us to go over and beyond that. We realize that some competitors are already trying to innovate. They're already getting into other industries that we are not in right now. And for us, while we realize that we need to solve the human mobility problem in urban centers, we're not ruling out the possibility for us to go beyond just moving people from one place to the next.
Should I, for argument's sake, would that essentially include an acquisition at some point?
That's a good question. However, we remain an independent company. Yes, there's all these rounds of raises that we've done, but we remain a very independent company. We remain committed on our vision, and we're not getting acquired.
Right, but would you acquire someone? I mean, for instance, for argument's sake, Safaricom invested in Sendi, right? For, little transportation firm, essentially in the same line of work as you guys. Platform, but they focus on goods, moving goods around, as opposed to moving people around. And at face value, it seems like a marriage made in heaven. They've got the service already. It's working. It's been tried. You have the capital, and you want to expand your service offerings. Why not join these two in holy matrimony?
I think that's a great question. I think I'm in a good position to answer that question because I led the expansion effort across East Africa. And our philosophy to solving problems has always been, we believe in our own original solutions. So while there were other players in the market in Uganda and Tanzania, there were even players who were doing motorcycles in Kenya and Uganda before. Yeah. We believe in our own original solution. So we realized that in certain industries, we're not going to be the first people to go in there, but we believe that the value that we add to the industry, the value that the Bolt adds to the industry is unique. Unique in the sense that one is we find very highly localized solutions to our problems. That's one. Two is also the way we think about driver earnings is completely different from the way the competition thinks about it. So like driver earnings form the very core focus of our decision making. Therefore, these principles seem to be sometimes in conflict with existing players.
What are your driver earnings ratios at this point? What's your split?
So drivers take home 85% of earnings. We only keep 15%.
Right. Okay, one last question for you. So speaking of your competitor, Uber, because they're the other big player in this particular market, they seem to be spending money on, for lack of a better word, moonshot programs, right? So Uber will spend money on research and development in self-driving cars, for instance. That's not something that Taxify does. Well, Bolt now. But for you, your company just focuses on, these are the services, can we make them better? What's your R&D spend like? What do you actually spend your R&D on?
That's an amazing question. I think Taxify, we have this obsession with very basic goals, right? So, like I said, our goal is to make movement of people in urban centers, to make it very efficient. That remains our goal. And how do we achieve that? We remain guided by a few principles. One is, let's ensure that drivers have the best earnings. Let's ensure that customers have a reliable transportation platform. Let them feel safe driving with us. So we remain very focused on very basic goals, really. We remain very focused on the fundamentals. You've asked about our expenditure on R&D and where we spend our money. And essentially, how we spend our money comes back to those goals, right? So it comes back to how do we optimize how a driver moves from the pickup point to where they pick up the customer. How do you optimize the pricing, right? How do we optimize the number of trips that this driver completes in every single hour? So we remained very focused on the fundamentals. And while I can't comment on what everybody else is doing, I think our goals are clear, and we like to stay very focused on our core values.
All right, we'll leave it there for the time being. Shivaji Maleji, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Ramah.
Appreciate it.
I appreciate it.
Right, so we're still in East Africa for the time being. The Kenyan shilling has had a very interesting couple of weeks. It's vaulted, in fact, to its strongest level against the American dollar in more than 3.5 years. Increased hard currency inflows and a drop in demand for exports. These are being attributed to the shilling's current levels. It was at 99.85 to the dollar, a level last seen in July 2015. That's 4 years ago. Prior to this, it was very close to breaking the 100 shillings to the dollar level, rather, in the past 2 months. Remittances and earnings from tourism also did surge to record highs in 2018. Time for a short break. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up next. The Chinese telecommunications giant Huawei sues the US government over being banned from the US. And the UK may delay its divorce with the EU if a revised deal is rejected in Parliament.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. we celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
For look at the economic data out of the country. The country's already considered.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Perina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives. News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what do you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Let's pick up the stories making the headlines at this hour. Starting in Egypt, 7 gunmen over there have been killed and a police officer injured in a shootout. The incident occurred at a security checkpoint in the country's Giza province. According to the Interior Ministry, the gunmen are said to be terrorists. They were planning to carry out attacks designed to provoke chaos. Also, the DR Congo's recently elected president, Felix Tshisekedi, has agreed to form a coalition government with his predecessor, Joseph Kabila. The joint government aims to preserve the historic peaceful transfer of power, strengthening peace and stability in the country. President Tshisekedi has not been able to push through his choice of prime minister, mainly because he doesn't have majority backing in the National Assembly. The stalemate has affected his ambitions reforming the Central African nation. Also, a car bomb explosion in Somalia has left 4 people dead in the capital, Mogadishu. 9 others have been wounded following the attack. The scene of the attack is close to the presidential palace. The Islamist group Al-Shabaab has claimed responsibility for this event. The group is fighting to overthrow the internationally backed federal government in Somalia. And Ethiopia is appealing to the international community for $1.3 billion in order to cater for its humanitarian needs this year. That request has been made in collaboration with the United Nations. It seeks to support over 8 million people across the country who have been displaced by ethnic conflict and are vulnerable to climate shocks and disease. That's a run through your headlines. Now, the Chinese telecommunications equipment maker Huawei is suing the US government over a ban it imposed on the Chinese firm's products. Huawei says that move, in its view, is unconstitutional. Now, the ban derives its legal force from a provision of the National Defense Authorization Act, which was signed into law by President Donald Trump in August 2018. That act bars federal agencies and their contractors from procuring Huawei's equipment and services. This lawsuit is the latest flashpoint between China and the United States, even as the firm's CFO is fighting extradition next door in Canada.
Section A9 is unconstitutional in its singling out of Huawei by name, blacklisting it, damaging its reputation, and denying it any way to clear its name and escape sanction. Its attack on Huawei is purposeful and punitive.
Right then, let's get you the latest on this story. Jim Spellman is live in Washington, D.C. with more on this. So, Jim, walk us through the broad outlines of this case. What is being alleged and what reliefs does Huawei hope to get?
Well, Ramah, this 54-page lawsuit was filed in a federal court in Texas here in the United States near Huawei's American headquarters. It claims Huawei has been unfairly banned from use in the United States government's telecommunication networks. The U.S., dating back to the Obama administration, has labeled Huawei a security risk and claims users of Huawei gear could be spied upon by the Chinese government. Huawei has denied this, and the U.S. has not publicly released evidence to support its claim. The ban, as you mentioned, was passed by Congress last year as part of a sprawling defense spending bill known as the NDAA. It bars the U.S. government and contractors from purchasing equipment or services from 5 Chinese tech companies, including Huawei. This lawsuit makes 3 arguments. It claims, first, that the NDAA unfairly singles out Huawei. Second, it claims that the law violates the company's due process rights by stigmatizing Huawei without giving the company a chance to defend itself. And third, it claims that the Congress has overstepped its bounds when making the law. Huawei wants parts of the law declared unconstitutional. It wants an injunction immediately to stop the U.S. from enforcing the law, and it's also seeking unspecified damages. The suit lays out damages that are bound to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. One contract alone that it lost in the state of Georgia was for $20 million a year. Ramah?
Indeed. So last year, because we've been here before, last year Kaspersky lost a legal challenge that it had filed challenging a ban on the use of its software pretty much under the same circumstances in U.S. government networks. Now, sure, Kaspersky is a smaller company, but given the precedent that has set, what are the odds of Huawei's suit filed in Texas succeeding?
Well, it's difficult to say, but it's clear that Huawei has an uphill battle with this case. The judge in that Kaspersky ruling ruled that protecting American computer networks outweighs the damages that may be done to private companies. In her ruling throwing out the suit, the judge wrote this, quote, "These defensive actions may very well have adverse consequences for some third parties," referring to Kaspersky, "but that does not make them unconstitutional." But of course, every case is different, and Huawei attorneys will likely look at the Kaspersky case to avoid making the same arguments and falling into the same traps lawyers made in that case. But on the other hand, of course, the U.S. will likely point to that case as a precedent and seek to have the case thrown out before significant evidence can be revealed. Ramah?
Indeed. One last question for you, Jim. So Huawei's case, at least from the suit I've seen, doesn't really focus that much on IP infringement accusations. It instead focuses on making the argument that this, by being barred from the U.S. market, it's essentially been denied due process, and it's framing itself as a victim of extrajudicial punishment. What do analysts make of this approach?
Well, I've spoken to 2 lawyers here this morning who tell me that there's little chance the Huawei case will be a complete victory that will allow them to freely do business in the United States. But the suit may help Huawei's reputation globally. Filing a lawsuit can project an air of confidence and a willingness to publicly address security concerns that could help Huawei in places like Europe, where the U.S. is urging countries to ban Huawei. So while a lot of this will take place in a court in Texas, it could have an impact well beyond the U.S. borders. Ramah?
Indeed, and we'll certainly keep a very close eye on developments on your side of the world. Thank you for the update, Jim. That's Jim Spellman there live in Washington, D.C. Now, let's turn our attention to China's fiscal policy. On the sidelines of the 2 sessions, the country's finance ministry briefed the media on its vision as far as fiscal reforms are concerned. A proactive fiscal policy is an important factor in underpinning China's economy and its growth in 2019. But the government's fiscal deficit target has been set a lot lower than some may have expected. So what is the consideration that was taken to inform that policy? CGTN's Xie Cheng explains.
China's fiscal policy doesn't mean opening a floodgate of stimulus. That's the word from Chinese Finance Minister Liu Kun.
China will not allow new hidden debt and strictly forbids illegal financing guarantees offered by local governments.
Fiscal stimulus is the primary focus for China in 2019, as it is shifting away from cutting debt to boosting the economy, from the bigger-than-expected VAT cuts for manufacturers to an increase in the fiscal deficit target this year. But as downward pressure on the economy builds up, the question is whether that fiscal deficit target is aggressive enough.
We raised the requirements on profits submitted by certain state-owned financial institutions and companies. We also asked local governments to diversify the ways to boost their finances. That allows us not to raise the deficit target too high.
This round of economic stimulus puts manufacturing and small businesses on top. The goal is to spur companies' capital spending to buy new assets and expand their businesses for more economic vitality. Xia Cheng, CGTN, Beijing.
The UK will probably have to delay its departure from the EU if lawmakers over there reject the government's proposed divorce deal in a vote next week. That's according to the Finance Minister, Philip Hammond. Now, the minister has also warned of the risks involved in a no-deal Brexit. Britain is set to leave the EU in about 22 days. The government is expected to try again to get its deal approved next week, Tuesday. If that fails, the Prime Minister will then ask Parliament on Wednesday if it wants to leave without a deal. Analysts say that it may cause damaging consequences for the world's fifth largest economy. If legislators reject that outcome too, lawmakers then have to decide the next day, that's Thursday, if they want to try to delay Brexit. A delay in turn would open the door to wholesale renegotiation or second referendum that critics say would essentially destroy faith in the UK's democracy.
Well, our focus is on the meaningful vote that will take place next Tuesday, and it's very important that my colleagues think about the consequences of not agreeing this deal. This is now the last chance to be confident that we can get this deal done and we can leave the EU on schedule. We know what the process will be. If we don't pass the meaningful vote on Tuesday, we'll go into a parliamentary process which very likely will lead to an extension of time and an uncertain outcome.
Let's focus on the European economy. The final reading of the Eurozone's fourth quarter GDP confirmed sluggishness in the region's economy. The Currency Bloc's Statistics Office, that's Eurostat, revised down fourth quarter GDP growth to 1.1% from a previous estimate of 1.2% year-on-year. The figure also didn't miss expectations, which are on average around the 1.2% region. On a quarter-to-quarter basis, the Eurozone economy expanded by 0.2% in the 3 months to December last year. That matched the previous readout and expectations. Net exports, investment and consumption drove Eurozone growth in the last quarter of 2018, helping to offset a sharp drop in inventories. Now then, on to other matters. The Shanghai-based research firm Hurun says that Beijing has the world's highest number of billionaires. The Chinese capital is said to keep its crown thanks to the country's growing number of wealthy entrepreneurs. But many do wonder about economic inequality, especially with China less than 2 years away from its goal of wiping out poverty nationwide. CGTN's Nathan King takes up the story on What's Hot tonight.
When it comes to billionaires, Beijing is top dog. Even with a slowdown in growth and the stock market swings, Beijing is the #1 metropolis for those who have over $1 billion or more in assets. Beijing's more than 100 billionaires beat out New York City. Hong Kong is also in the money with 69 billionaires. Globally, China has the most in the over $1,000 million club, with over a quarter of the world's total.
You've seen a country like China come from zero to where we are today, which has never been seen before. And I think to be able to witness that entrepreneurship, that raw entrepreneurship firsthand, is absolutely amazing.
Well, having a lot of billionaires in your city is kind of a source of pride, especially for a big city like Beijing. It's also a sign of potential economic inequality. So we ask regular Beijingers how they feel about the really rich that live in their midst.
President Xi said we all have a Chinese dream, right? So I think instead of being a billionaire myself, I would love to see the country being prosperous as a whole.
I don't think money equals happiness. I think if I were a billionaire, I would donate some of my money to charity and contribute more to our society.
I think all countries have the rich and poor. The right thing to do is to live your life the best way possible and to do more for public interest.
Inequality is very much on the agenda this week here in Beijing as the two sessions grapple with China's challenges. The task, make it possible for more Beijing billionaires in the future, but also ensure that the rest of the city and the nation aren't left behind. Nathan King, CGTN, Beijing.
All right, then let's run through commodity prices here for you. Some interesting things to note. So Brent crude 1.14% higher, 1338 GMT, at about 66 odd a barrel. It did drop a little lower later on. Now, it's had a remarkable 9 weeks so far, with a 24% rise in prices as OPEC plus production cuts do kick in. That's certainly something we'll keep a very close eye on for you here on the program. Here's what's coming up next. We'll take a look at a startup in Nigeria that's developed a way to navigate the traffic nightmare in Lagos.
You don't find the stories of North Africa sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back to the program. Now, in a city of over 20 million people that is notorious for its frankly insane traffic, and that's an understatement, getting around Lagos, Nigeria's commercial capital, is frankly just an extreme sport. Let's call it what it is. But one startup is making things a little easier for commuters. CGTN Deji Badmos has the details from grassroots tonight.
They've become a regular feature on Lagos' ever-busy roads. Okada, that's what they are popularly called here.
The truth is that without these commercial motorcyclists, it'd be practically impossible to beat the notorious Lagos traffic. But there's one major drawback: safety. They're very much prone to accidents.
But this young man is changing the face of the commercial motorcycling business in Nigeria, leveraging on technology and addressing some of the safety issues the mode of transportation has long contended with. In February last year, Deji Oduto founded what is now popularly known as GoKada, an on-demand motorcycle hailing service startup with an investment of just under $1,000. It's basically the motorcycle version of global cab hailing service Uber and operates just like that.
We were trying to identify how to find the right balance between using a two-wheeler to solve the traffic issue and also being able to communicate, safety and trust to, the average commuter in Lagos. And that was how GoKada came up. We decided to be a safe and, quick form of transport for the average consumer in Lagos, to connect users to drivers that are around their locations. And we felt the only way we could do this effectively and gain the traction that we've gained now is if we decided to brand our bikes, which was what we did.
GoKada is now becoming a regular feature on Lagos' busy roads these days. It's difficult to miss the green-colored motorcycles and their complementing green helmets in major parts of the city. Riders are specially trained before they are engaged. Customers can order a motorcycle ride either through the company's website or by using the company's geolocation-based smartphone mobile app.
The drivers pay us a fixed fare on a daily basis. And for us, we moved from the commission model to this model primarily because we found out that this was what was prevalent in the transportation industry here in Lagos. And for the drivers, they enjoy the upside. So if a driver, makes 5,000 today, if the driver is giving us 3,000 and he makes 5,000, the driver has 2,000 to himself. So there's the upside for the driver because if he makes 10,000, he makes more. So that way the incentive is on the driver to do as much as possible to earn more money.
Business has been booming for GoKada. In just 1 year of operation, over 100,000 persons have downloaded and now use its mobile app to order rides. And from just 20 motorcycles at inception, GoKada now has close to 1,000 motorcycles doing around 5,000 rides every day.
Up until now, we have been financing all the bikes ourselves. And it's been a challenge because, we are not able to serve our customers effectively. For the first year, we have been engaging with financial institutions We've been engaging with credit firms. We're also looking at DFIs as well. But we haven't really gotten a financial partner who is going to help us scale because of the financing landscape here in Nigeria. So one option that we are looking to employ in 2019 is the financial partner program, where we sort of take our eyes off the traditional financiers and go to the public.
Deji and his team are already thinking beyond on-demand motorcycling hailing service. The paintings on this wall capture their big dream, and one step at a time, they're marching on to live out that dream. Deji Badmo, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
And finally, the famed Japanese head massage spa called Goku no Kimochi, or Goku's Feeling, made a soft launch of its first US outlet with a new name, Gu9, in New York on the 1st of March. Now, the name essentially pays homage to a character, Goku, or the Monkey King, from one of the 4 famous Chinese novels, Journey to the West.
It has a waiting list of more than 430,000 people. Customers at the spa are treated to dreamlike images projected onto screens as they walk in. President of Goku no Kimochi, Asumi Kaneda, had wanted to bring her salon to New York since she opened her first head massage spa in Kyoto 10 years ago. It took her 3.5 years to open the Midtown Manhattan location.
We focus on the sleeping market here in New York like we do in Japan. I want to target people who are having difficulty sleeping. I think that New Yorkers have a lot of stress. I want to make this spa a place which can attract those people.
Many clients fall asleep during the spa's most popular service, Zuchu Swimming or Climax Sleep. The hour-long head massage is $150 US.
It was so tranquil and very calming and relaxing, and I've been to a bunch of different spas before and gotten like many different treatments, but I haven't had one that specifically massaging my head and shoulders, and it was so nice.
Japanese IT specialist Taiji Imamura serves his many clients in Japan from New York, and was feeling tired because of difference in time zones.
I was trying to get a reservation at the Japan location, however, it was very difficult to do so. And, I was feeling a little tired these days and, heard that this new location is going to be open. So I figured, just to make a show up here.
Goku no Kimochi has 4 branches throughout Japan. Kaneda, who was an accountant before opening her first salon, had trouble sleeping and couldn't find a head massage place that could help her. So she created Goku no Kimochi, or Goku's Feeling. The name pays homage to a character, Goku, from a famous Chinese legend who wears a constricting ring around his hat. When the ring disappears, Goku feels peace, tranquility, and freedom, which is a feeling that Goku no Kimochi aspires to. CGTN.
All right, then a quick run through the currencies here for you. So it's been the better part of 3 years at the very least, frankly, since it last saw the shilling in that territory, in 2 digits. So today was, frankly, rather interesting with the local units at those levels. The lowest it went to was about 99.88 to the dollar. Not quite to the levels of 85, 86 shillings to the dollar last seen around 2014. But with today's numbers, the shilling has capped a steady set of incremental gains against the dollar, with a 3% gain from a low of 103.07 that was seen in November. The question is, can it hold on to those gains? We'll find out. Those are your currencies, and that is it for tonight's edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen here in the last hour. There's several ways of getting your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The world today is up next.